Just like with Comic Zone, Vectorman was a game released towards the end of Sega Genesis' lifespan, during a time where the new, shinier Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn had emerged. Ironically, Vectorman was released a year after the Saturn's release, and it's worth noting that the humble 4th generation Genesis console was only discontinued 1 year before the Saturn's demise. Having still had my Sega Genesis and being an avid follower of GamePro, needless to say their Vectorman review caught my eye, and it was a game I had to play. So while developers were still getting to grips with the new 5th gen hardware, this meant that those familiar with the Genesis were able to squeeze out more performance from the aging console and produce games that seemed to defy the console's capabilities. In this case, Vectorman incorporated a new programming technique called vector piece animation, and the titular character was actually made up of 23 individual sprites coded to move in unison.
No, I say.
Vectorman used pre-rendered 3D models to achieve an elevated graphical look and feel, and was considered to be the answer to Nintendo Rare's Donkey Kong Country series, as both used bleeding-edge graphical technologies previously thought impossible in 16-bit systems. Furthermore, Vectorman is predominantly a side-scrolling run-and-gun game, but went to impressive lengths to include other game styles, such as a 3D railroad level, where you have to avoid being derailed by the hands of a giant Orbot as the screen's perspective shifts from left to right, and a top-down Frogger level, which again features giant crushing hands. Impressive lighting and weather effects punctuate the graphics beautifully, and nice little touches such as Vectorman's gunfire reflecting on his body, swarms of little insects buzzing around light sources, and a funky little animation that has Vectorman juggling his own arm when he's leaning against something really elevate this game's visuals to the next level. The stages are vast and varied as you navigate Vectorman across 16 levels with plenty of secret areas to uncover and enemies to battle. Some noticeably impressive levels are definitely the Arctic Ridge, as you fight your way through the underground ice caverns accentuated by impressive lighting effects, as the sun punches through the openings, and the amazingly atmospheric lightning storm effects in the Nightscape level. Some other noteworthy elements include the smooth parallax scrolling of the vast chambers in the hydroponic lab, as well as the sprawling netted background, and man, just those beautiful clouds in some of the levels really sets Vectorman apart from other platformers. Given that the game is around 23 years old, I think it has aged considerably well and still remains impressive to this day, especially when you consider that indie game development has contributed to the resurgence of 2D video games, having released some fantastic looking titles such as Dead Cells, Hyper Light Drifter, and Shovel Knight, all of which defy the status quo of the last couple of decades where the objective has been to create bigger and more realistic games. The irony is not lost to me when you consider that we live in an era where developers are actively choosing to make games look like they once did 20 or 30 years ago, and I'm sure this trend will continue to grow as time goes on. And if you ever had any doubt as to the undying stay power and relevance of the 2D pixel, just compare a 3D game from the mid to late 90s to a 2D one, and you will see that the 3D engine does not age well, making some games outright unplayable.
Good God, man.
I could undoubtedly talk about Vectorman's visuals for this entire episode, however, there are other equally important aspects of this game I need to get to as well. It is clear that Vectorman has the visual chops to stand alongside the best that the Genesis has to offer, so is the gameplay equally as good? Thankfully, the answer to that question is yes. Vectorman is an extremely accessible game even for casual gamers, and only makes use of a run, jump and shoot mechanic. Pressing jump while airborne will trigger a boost, which is pretty handy for righting yourself in instances where you're knocked off of a platform, or if you're wanting to dodge an enemy. In fact, there are so many applications for the boost that you're bound to discover many more as you progress through the game. Being an Orbot, which as you might have guessed going by Vectorman's appearance is a robot made up entirely of orbs, you are able to transform into various other forms thanks to power-ups which can be obtained by destroying television receivers found throughout the game. These transformations include a drill, bomb, fish and a race car among others. Each have their own unique uses, and some such as the bomb and drill allow you to open up levels to previously hidden or inaccessible areas. Your default ball gun can also be swapped out with various power-ups such as machine gun, spray shot and a powerful bowler weapon. These enhancements will eventually run out, but I find the default weapon to be the most satisfying and all-round effective weapon, and I also really like the sound that it makes. Other power-ups include point and health multipliers, extra lives, milestones, extra time and more. Vectorman is a pretty challenging and relentless game at times, as you are constantly bombarded by a host of enemies, some of which can be extremely irritating such as these fucking beetles. as they continuously crash into you if you aren't quick enough on the draw, and find yourself running into these things. There's also a host of varied boss battles to contend with, most of which adhere to the Orbot design, and while the first boss is pretty easy to dispatch, eventually you're going to encounter things like Clockwork, Piranha, and Warhead, which are just going to make you want to pull your fucking hair out. Vectorman's story is a simple one. The year is 2049, humans have characteristically fucked up the environment, and as an Orbot you are tasked with cleaning up the pollution-stricken planet currently devoid of human beings who have subsequently escaped to the stars, looking for other planets to presumably piss all over while you clean up the Earth. A powerful Orbot named Rasta, who oversees the cleanup via a planet-wide comnet, goes insane when maintenance drones accidentally connect a nuclear bomb to his master control circuits. I'm not sure how that works exactly, but all you need to know is that it's a bad thing, as Rasta becomes Warhead, a robotic overlord who wants to turn the Earth into a death trap for the returning humans. Pretty ironic when you consider that we already did that, which is why we needed to leave the planet in the first fucking place. Vectorman was off-world at the time that all this shit with Warhead went down, having delivered a payload of sludge to the sun, and was therefore unaffected by the planet-wide mind control via numerous television receivers strewn throughout the planet that has caused all the other Orbots to go crazy. The story is told via means of a series of impressively detailed stills at the beginning of the game, and then once more at the game's conclusion. Vectorman's instruction manual is also filled with numerous cool little pencil drawings, which I think is quite a nice touch. Vectorman's music and sound effects parallel the futuristic theme of the game wonderfully. The sounds of crackling thunder, bullet ricochets, gunfire, and enemies stomping around are really well defined and serve to heighten the cool techno soundtrack. The only audio effect I found to be annoying was the obnoxiously loud and tinny explosions after defeating a boss or when the bombs are used. But at this point I'm only nitpicking here, and in contrast to all that, Vectorman's voice is oddly quite human, but I think it works well in this instance. It goes without saying that Vectorman is definitely still good today, and thanks to numerous compilations such as Wii Virtual Console, Steam, and most recently this year as an iOS and Android port, Vectorman is still hugely accessible today whether you have an original Sega Genesis or not. So for that reason there's definitely no reason not to pick up this awesome game.